She didn't scream for help. She screamed to save a stranger's life. The bridge was already groaning when she ran toward it, board splitting rope, snapping river, churning black below. She had no horse, no weapon, nothing but her voice, and the desperate knowledge that a man on a dark stallion was riding straight into death. He didn't thank her. He barely looked at her, and she had no idea. Not then. Not yet that the stranger she pulled back from the edge of that broken bridge was the man fate had already chosen to break her heart. If this story moves you, subscribe and leave your city in the comments. I want to see how far this tale has traveled. The summer of 1883 came to Harrow Creek, Montana, like a punishment. The heat settled into the valley in June and refused to leave. It pressed down on the pine ridges and baked the creek beds pale and cracked. The grass along the lower pastures turned the color of old bone. The cattle grew restless. The horses sweated through their sleep. And the people of Harrow Creek, miners, ranchers, shopkeepers, and drifters, moved through their days with a short-tempered weariness that came from too many weeks without rain and too many debts without relief. Clara Mae Sutton had learned to move quietly through towns like this one. She was 31 years old, though most people who passed her on the street would have guessed older. Not because she looked worn, but because she carried herself with the kind of careful stillness that only comes from surviving things that would have broken someone else. Her hair was dark and simply pinned. Her dress was clean but faded. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and a leather satchel over the other, and she walked at the pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and had no interest in announcing it. She had arrived in Harrow Creek 3 days ago on the stage from Billings. The letter in her satchel said she had a position as a bookkeeper's assistant at the Mercantile on Main Street starting the 1st of July. She had exactly $11, one change of clothing, and enough dried biscuits to last her through the week if she was careful. She was always careful. The morning everything changed, she woke before dawn, not because she intended to, but because something in the air felt wrong, that particular quality of wrongness she'd learned to trust, the way some people trust weather aches in old bones. She lay still for a moment in the narrow boarding house bed, listening to the dark. Then she heard it. A sound beneath the usual sounds. Beneath the crickets and the distant cattle lowing, and the creak of old timber in the summer heat. Water. Moving wrong. The creek that ran east of town crossed under the old Harrow Bridge about a quarter-mile from the boarding house. That bridge was the only reliable crossing for 15 miles in either direction. Every supply wagon, every rider coming down from the mountain ranches, every traveler heading into or out of town came across that bridge. Clara knew it because she'd crossed it herself when the stage rolled in, and she'd noticed even then how the left sideboards were soft and gray with rot, and how the central support rope had frayed into a kind of silvery whisper against the post. She'd meant to mention it to someone. She hadn't yet found anyone who seemed worth mentioning it to. She got up, pulled her boots on, didn't bother with her hair, walked out into the blue-black dark of 5 in the morning with nothing but instinct pulling her toward the creek. She smelled it before she saw it. The sudden cold sharpness of disturbed water, the heavy green smell of exposed riverbank mud. The creek had risen. Not from rain, there hadn't been any rain, but from something upstream. A dam break maybe, or a log jam giving way under pressure. Whatever it was, the water level had climbed 2 full feet in the night, and it was pushing hard and fast against the bridge pilings. Clara stood at the bank and looked at the bridge in the early dark. The left side had already dropped 4 inches. She could see it, the tilt slight but definite like a table with one short leg. The center support rope had pulled taut against the post and was vibrating with the pressure of the current. She looked up the road. Hoofbeats. Coming fast. Coming down from the mountain, from the direction of the high ranches. She moved into the middle of the road. She started waving. Stop! Her voice was sharp and clear in the early quiet. The bridge is compromised. Stop your horse. The rider didn't slow. She could see him now, a big man on a black stallion moving at a canter, the horse's hooves throwing up pale dust from the dry road. He rode with the easy authority of someone who knew these roads the way other men knew their own front porches. He wasn't reckless. He just wasn't paying attention to a woman standing in the dark waving her arms. Stop! Clara didn't step aside. She held her ground in the center of the road and kept waving. "The left side is failing, do not cross that bridge." The rider pulled up 20 feet short of her. The stallion came to a hard stop, tossing its head nostrils flaring. The man on its back looked down at her with an expression that was not quite irritation and not quite amusement, just a flat measuring look. He was somewhere in his late 30s, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days, and eyes that caught the first thin light of dawn in a way that made them seem darker than they were. "Ma'am." His voice was low and even. "You're standing in the road." "I'm aware," Clara said. She did not move. "The bridge is failing. The creek rose overnight. The left support is already dropped, and the center rope is at full tension. If you ride onto that structure at speed, you will go into the water." He looked past her at the bridge. A long pause. "I've crossed that bridge 100 times. You've never crossed it after the creek rose 2 feet in one night," she said. "Look at the left side. Look at the tilt." Another pause. Longer this time. He swung down from the saddle in one smooth movement and walked forward, leading the stallion by the reins, moving past her without a word. He stopped at the edge of the bridge and crouched down, one hand on the board nearest the support post. He pressed on it. The board shifted. Not a lot. "Enough." He stood up slowly. "When did this happen?" "Sometime in the night," Clara said. "I heard the water change. I don't know what gave way upstream, but the current doubled." He looked at her. Not the quick, dismissive look he'd given her before. This was something different. A reassessment, rapid and thorough. The way a man looks at terrain. He thought he understood, and has just realized he doesn't. "You came down here alone, before dawn." "Someone had to." "You could have woken the town." "I could have," she agreed. "I also could have stood here and waved at you." That seemed faster. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something adjacent to it. "Jude Callahan," he said. He didn't offer his hand. He just said the name the way men in these mountains said their names, flat and factual, like a land deed being read aloud. "Clara Sutton," she said. He looked back at the bridge. "I've got supplies in the saddlebag I was supposed to deliver to a widow woman up on the East Ridge by noon. She's got a sick child." "Then you'll need to find another way around," Clara said. "Or wait for the water to drop and someone to shore up the support. But that bridge won't carry your horse and your supplies today." Jude said nothing for a moment. He was studying the current. She could see him calculating the way a man does when he's trying to find a way to argue with something he already knows is true. "The South Ford," he finally said. 8 miles. "That would be my recommendation." He looked at her again. That same flat reassessment. "Where are you from, Miss Sutton?" "Most recently Billings." "Before that?" "Does it matter?" He almost smiled again. "Guess not." He turned and gathered his reins. "You ought to get back to wherever you're staying. Road's no place for a woman alone before sunup." "I'll note your concern," Clara said, and she said it with such precise, quiet politeness that it took him a moment to realize she was doing nothing of the sort. He rode south toward the ford. She watched him go. She stood there for another 20 minutes until the sun was properly up and she could flag down the first townsperson on the road. It took her that long to convince anyone to go look at the bridge. It took 2 more hours and the near collapse of a supply wagon for anyone to admit she had been right. By then, she was already at the mercantile opening the ledgers. Harrow Creek did not warm to strangers quickly. It was the kind of town that had been through enough a silver boom that went bust 2 brutal winters, a grass fire that took out the livery and the feed store in the same afternoon, to have developed a permanent suspicion of anything new. New faces meant new trouble. New trouble meant new loss. The economy of distrust was simple and deeply understood. Clara Sutton, as a new face and a woman without local connections, was regarded with the particular brand of cool indifference that Harrow Creek reserved for people who hadn't yet earned the right to be trusted or disliked. She had expected this. She had lived it before. At the mercantile, she worked for a man named Horace Gilmore, who was 63, half-deaf, and nearly buried alive under 4 years of disorganized account books. He had hired her through a letter of inquiry she'd sent from Billings after reading a small advertisement in the territorial paper. He greeted her on her first morning with the expression of a man who had requested lumber and received a house cat, but within 2 hours, he'd revised his opinion. She was fast with numbers, faster with organization, and she asked questions only once before she never needed to ask them again. "Where'd you learn to keep books?" he asked her on the second day. "My father," she said. "He ran a hardware supply in Nebraska for 15 years. He teach you well." "He taught me everything," she said. "Then he died, and the man who bought the business didn't want to keep a woman on the payroll." Horace had looked at her over his spectacles and said nothing. He went back to his adding. But from that day on, he stopped watching her the way he watched things he wasn't sure about. That was the story of Clara's life in its simplest form. She was competent. Thoroughly, demonstrably, uselessly competent. She could read land surveys and translate them into plain language. She could tell a genuine bill of sale from a fraudulent one by the paper quality and the pressure of the ink. She could calculate compound interest in her head, and she understood contract law at the level of a man who'd had formal schooling, because she'd spent 5 years reading every legal document she could get her hands on after a fraudulent contract had stripped her family of their Nebraska property 3 years after her father died. She didn't talk about that. She didn't talk about much. She did her work. She paid her rent at the boarding house. She ate her meals quietly, and she watched. She watched the way water moves around a stone, patient, observant, finding the shape of things without making a sound. What she saw in Harrow Creek in the first week were several things she filed away without comment. She saw that the town's water supply, a diverted creek channel that fed the main well and the livestock troughs, was losing pressure. The flow at the main trough was noticeably weaker than it should have been for early summer. She saw that at least 3 of the ranchers who came in to settle accounts at the mercantile were paying in smaller amounts than their previous records indicated, and their expressions when they signed the ledger had the tight, careful quality of men managing fear. She saw that the man named Wade Prescott, who owned the largest land parcel north of town, and who came into the mercantile twice in her first week, with the easy swagger of someone unaccustomed to resistance, always asked to see the account records for the North Valley ranches. Horace always produced them. Prescott always reviewed them with the particular kind of attention a man gives to things he is planning to acquire. She noted all of this. She said nothing. And then, on the morning of the 7th day, Jude Callahan walked into the mercantile. He came in at 9:30, when the morning light was already aggressive and the street outside was filling with the sounds of a town coming fully awake. He wore work clothes, not the riding clothes she'd seen him in before, and his hat was pushed back on his head in a way that suggested he'd been up since before the light. I didn't see her immediately. He went straight to the counter and spoke to Horace about a supply order, grain mainly, and some hardware. Clara kept her head down over the ledger. "Jude Callahan, this is my new bookkeeper," Horace said, because Horace had no particular gift for subtlety. "Miss Clara Sutton, come up from Billings." Jude turned. He recognized her immediately. She could tell by the way his eyes settled, that same flat, reassessing look, recalibrating faster than most men bothered to. "Miss Sutton." He tipped his hat. An automatic courtesy, habitual and genuine. "Mr. Callahan," she said. She did not look up from the ledger for more than a moment. "You two met?" Horace asked. "Briefly," Jude said. He was still looking at her. "She kept me from riding off a broken bridge." Horace looked between them. "That right. The creek rose overnight," Clara said without inflection. "Mr. Callahan was riding in from the mountain. I flagged him down." "Hell of a thing," Horace said. He was already pulling the supply request book from under the counter. "That bridge held up the Henderson wagon for 3 hours yesterday. They had to detour to the South Ford." "How's it looking now?" Jude asked. "Town crew shored up the left support," Horace said. "Might hold through summer, might not. Depends on whether we get any more rain upstream." "If it rains upstream," Clara said without looking up, "the current will do more damage to the right piling than the left. The left was already compromised, so the crew reinforced it, but the right hasn't been touched, and it's the older timber." There was a brief silence. "How do you know that?" Jude asked. I walked down and looked at it this morning before work. Another silence. Longer. Why? He said. She did finally look up at him then. Direct, uncomplicated. Because I wanted to know if the problem was fixed or just shifted, she said. Those aren't the same thing. Jude looked at her for a moment. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement, the kind that costs a person something. She's not wrong, he said to Horace. He turned back to the supply list. Clara returned to the ledger. She heard about Jude Callahan by accumulation. The way you learn things in a small town, not from one source, but from the residue of many pieced together over days. He owned the Callahan Mountain Ranch, 800 acres up on the high ridge east of town, worked with 2 permanent hands and seasonal help. Had owned it for 11 years since he'd come back from wherever he'd been before. Nobody seemed entirely sure where that was, though the name of a town in Wyoming came up more than once. He ran cattle and quarter horses. He sold some of the horses to the army, and some to ranchers, and his reputation on horseflesh was sound enough that men rode 2 counties over to buy from him. Howe was not married, had not been married as far as anyone knew, or at least as far as anyone would say directly. He was not unfriendly in the deliberate hostile way of some mountain men, but he was not easy either. He said what he meant, and nothing extra. He had no interest in town politics or social engagements. He attended church twice a year, Christmas and Easter, and the rest of the time he kept to the mountain. He had 3 years ago come close to losing the ranch. This part of the story came in fragments. From Horace, who mentioned it sideways while reviewing old account records. From the woman at the boarding house who was more forthcoming over breakfast. From a pair of ranchers who came in on a Thursday and spoke too freely near the back shelves while Clara was rearranging supply stock. The short version was this: a man named Harlan Prescott. Wade. Prescott's father, now dead, had attempted to invalidate the deed to the Callahan Ranch on the grounds of a boundary dispute that everyone in town believed was manufactured. The dispute had dragged through county records for 18 months. Jude had refused to settle. He'd gone to the territorial court himself with his own documents and won. But the fight had cost him 2 of his best ranch hands, most of his working capital, and whatever remained of his faith in institutions and paper agreements. The son. Wade Prescott had apparently inherited his father's interest in the Callahan Ranch, along with everything else. Clara put this information away, in the same careful place she put everything else she noted without acting on. She was good at waiting. The second time she spoke to Jude Callahan at any length was the second week of July on a Tuesday during the town's brief afternoon quiet when the heat drove most people indoors. She had gone to the creek to check the bridge. Old habit. She went every few days, not because anyone asked her to, but because it bothered her. The shifted problem, the unaddressed right, piling the creek still running higher than normal for the season. He was already there. Howe was crouched at the base of the right piling. One hand testing the timber, a slight frown pulling the corners of his mouth. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the bank. "You were right," he said without preamble. "I usually am," she said. "About structures." He stood, brushed the river mud from his hands on his work pants. "Town crew doesn't want to hear it." "Town crews rarely do," she said. "What did they say?" "That the repair held fine, and they don't need a rancher telling them their business." He looked back at the piling. The right timber's got a crack in it, running horizontal, about 2 feet below the waterline. "How long before it fails?" "Depends on the load." He squinted at the creek surface, reading it the way she'd learned to read documents, looking for the thing behind the thing. "Big freight wagon fully loaded, could be 2 weeks, could be tomorrow." "Someone should be warned." "Yeah," he said. "Someone should." They both stood there a moment, looking at the bridge. "Did you put it in writing?" she asked. "I told the crew foreman." "Did you put it in writing?" she repeated. He looked at her. "If you told him and it fails," Clara said, "he'll say he doesn't remember the conversation. If you put it in writing and it fails, you have a record. A record means liability shifts." Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it precisely. It was the expression of a man encountering a way of thinking he recognized from hard experience. "You've done this before," he said. I've dealt with people who conveniently forget things before, she said. Yes. A pause. I'll write the letter this afternoon, he said. Horace can witness it. Good. She turned to go. Miss Sutton. She stopped, turned back. I was looking at her with that flat, careful look. Not unfriendly. Not anything she could easily name. Why do you come down here to check it? He said. Nobody's asking you to. Nobody was asking me to flag you down at dawn either, she said. I do things because they need doing, Mr. Callahan, not because I've been asked. He was quiet for a moment. That's a hard way to live, he said. Not unkindly, just factual. It's the only way I know, she said. She walked back toward town. She didn't look back. But she heard him a moment later begin walking behind her, not at her pace, not trying to catch up, just moving in the same direction, at the unhurried pace of a man who has decided something without making a statement about it. The town's opinion of Clara Sutton consolidated itself in the third week of July, and it was not flattering. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but it had a quality she recognized. That particular brand of communal dismissal that doesn't bother with cruelty because cruelty would require effort. It was the dismissal of disinterest. She was a stranger, a woman without connections, a bookkeeper useful perhaps, but not worth attention. This opinion was most concentrated among the women who gathered on Saturday afternoons at the dry goods store, and among the men who used the saloon as their primary forum for deciding what was true. What they said in various forms was this: Clara Sutton was pleasant enough, quiet, probably reliable with numbers, but had a habit of involving herself in things that weren't her business. The bridge incident was cited. Her habit of asking questions in the mercantile about matters beyond her direct responsibilities was noted. She was in the collective judgment of Harrow Creek, the sort of woman who didn't know her place, not badly, not dangerously, but enough to be mildly irritating. She heard a version of this directly from a woman named Vera Halston, who was the wife of one of the town's more prosperous merchants, and who had the social authority that comes from being prosperous in a town where most people are not. Vera came into the mercantile on a Friday with her daughter, who was 18, and had the anxious prettiness of a girl who has been told her appearance is her primary asset. They were ordering fabric. Clara was at the ledger. "You're the new bookkeeper," Vera said. It was not a question. "I am," Clara said. "From Billings." "Most recently." Vera looked at her with the particular expression of a woman assessing a woman faster and more complete than most men manage. "You were the one who made the fuss about the bridge." "I reported a structural concern," Clara said. "I wouldn't call it a fuss." Vera turned to consider a bolt of blue cotton. "Harrow Creek has managed its own affairs for 20 years without assistance." "The bridge didn't care about that," Clara said. "Neither did the water." A pause. Vera's daughter looked between them with wide eyes. "My advice," Vera said pleasantly, "is to let the men handle the men's concerns. It'll make your life considerably easier." "Thank you," Clara said. She returned to the ledger. "I'll take it under consideration." She didn't. What she did that same afternoon was notice something in the mercantile records that she had been slowly assembling into a shape she didn't like: the water supply issue. The reduced flow at the main trough was not random. Over the past 18 months, 4 separate properties in the North Valley had reported decreased water access. All 4 were small operations. All 4 had, within the past year, sold land to the same buyer. All 4 of those sales had happened within 2 months of the water problem starting. The buyer in each case was listed in the county records as a land management company called Harrow Valley Holdings. Clara knew nothing about Harrow Valley Holdings, except that it was new incorporated less than 2 years ago, and that its principal signatory in the one county record she'd been able to access through Horace's files was a man whose handwriting she had seen once before, on a supply receipt signed by Wade Prescott. She sat with this for a long time. Then she closed the ledger, locked the mercantile, and walked to the bridge. Jude Callahan was not there, but she stood at the bank for a long time, looking at the water, thinking about the way problems shift without being solved, and about the 4 ranchers who had sold land they probably hadn't wanted to sell, and about a man with easy swagger who liked to review other people's account books. The creek ran steadily, the right piling held. For now. When she turned to walk back to the boarding house, the summer dark was coming in fast from the east, rolling down off the mountain in a blue-gray wave, and the first stars were already out before the sun had finished going down. She thought about the letter Jude Callahan had sent to the town crew about the bridge. She thought about records, about liability, about the difference between a problem that's been fixed and a problem that's just been waiting. She thought someone is draining these men dry before they take the land. And she thought, I am the only person in this town who has the records to prove it. She walked back through the warm dark, and she was not afraid she was something more useful than afraid. She was certain. And she had learned a long time ago that certainty in the hands of someone who knows what to do with it is the most dangerous thing in any room. She did not know yet how dangerous this particular certainty would need to be. She would find out soon enough. She had meant to wait. That was the plan, the careful, patient plan she had assembled walking back through the dark from the bridge. Gather more. Confirm more. Don't move until you have enough to be irrefutable, because irrefutable is the only thing that works against a man with money and a clean signature. But the next morning changed the plan. It was Horace who told her without meaning to tell her anything. He came into the mercantile at 7 in the morning, looking pale under his sun-weathered skin, and he went straight to the back room without his usual greeting. Clara gave him 10 minutes. Then she brought him coffee and set it on the table beside him without asking. He picked it up, took a long drink. Henderson sold, he said. She kept her voice even. Robert Henderson, the North Valley Ranch, signed the papers yesterday afternoon. Horace turned the cup in his hands. Said the water situation got to be too much. Said he couldn't run cattle without reliable water, and he wasn't going to fight a problem he couldn't see the bottom of. A pause. Wade Prescott had a buyer ready same day, same hour near as I can tell. Clara thought about the records she'd reviewed the afternoon before. Henderson's account had been one of the 4, and now there was a 5th. Who's the buyer? She asked. Listed as some land company. Horace shook his head. Harrow Valley something. Holdings, she said. He looked at her. Harrow Valley Holdings, she said. It's appeared in 4 previous transactions in the past 18 months. All North Valley properties, all small operations, all with water problems. Horace put the cup down. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her the first day, reassessing, recalibrating, but this time there was something underneath it. Something that looked like worry. How long have you known this? I suspected it yesterday, she said. I was waiting until I had more documentation. She paused. I don't think I can wait now. Clara. He said her name for the first time, and the weight he put on it told her he was about to say something he'd rather not. Wade Prescott has friends in this county, friends in the territory. His father built half this town's credit on the back of Prescott money, and Wade's been calling in that goodwill since the day Harlan died. He looked at the table. What you're describing, if you're right, it means somebody's been cutting water access deliberately. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal. And the kind of men who do criminal things like this don't stop when you show them a ledger. I know, she said. Do you? I've dealt with men like this before, she said. I'm still here. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow the way a man nods when he's decided to stop arguing. What do you need? He said. Access to every transaction record involving North Valley land sales in the past 2 years, she said. And I need to understand the water channel rights. Who holds them? Who has the legal authority to divert or restrict? That'll be in the county deed office, he said. Garrett Wilson keeps those records. Is Garrett Wilson a friend of Wade Prescott's? A pause that was its own answer. Then I'll need to approach it carefully, she said. She went to the deed office alone at midday, when the heat drove most of the town into shade and the courthouse square was quiet. Garrett Wilson was a small, careful man in his 50s who looked at her over the counter with an expression that said he'd already categorized her and filed her somewhere unimportant. She gave him Horace's name and the name of the mercantile, and said she needed to review the water channel records for the North Valley properties as part of an account reconciliation. He gave her the records. She sat at the corner table and went through them with the speed and thoroughness of someone who has done this before in harder circumstances with less time. What she found was this: the primary water diversion channel that fed the North Valley properties had been reassigned 7 months ago from a shared-use community easement to a private holding. The holding was listed under a name she didn't recognize, Ridgecrest Water Management, but the authorization signature was familiar. Not because it was Prescott's name, because it was a signature she had seen once in Horace's files on a land deed co-signed as a witness, the county land assessor, a man named Briggs. The same Briggs who had 3 months ago approved the boundary survey that gave Harrow Valley Holdings clear title to the first North Valley property it had acquired. She sat very still for a moment. This wasn't just one man with a scheme. This was a structure. A web of agreements and authorizations built carefully, patiently over years. Someone had spent a long time laying the foundation for this. Someone who understood how county records worked, who knew which signatures to get and in what order. She wrote down what she needed. She put the notes in her satchel. She thanked Garrett Wilson by name pleasantly and left without hurrying. Outside, the heat hit her like a wall. She stood in the full sun for a moment thinking. She needed someone who knew this land and these people the way she knew documents. Someone whose word carried weight in this town because hers currently carried almost none. Someone who had already dealt with the Prescott family and survived it, and who understood the difference between losing and being defeated. She turned east, toward the road that led up the mountain. She didn't know the ranch. She'd never been there. But Horace had described it often enough: the long approach through Pine Ridge, the creek crossing at the lower pasture, the house built into the hillside with a covered porch facing west. She borrowed Horace's old mare, and she rode up through the mid-afternoon heat, and the mountain air thinned and cooled as she climbed, and the town fell away behind her into something small and manageable-looking. She found Jude Callahan at the fence line of the lower pasture on foot mending wire, with the focused quiet of a man who uses physical work to keep his thoughts in order. He heard the mare and looked up. He watched her ride toward him without changing his expression. "Miss Sutton," he said when she was close enough. He straightened. Set the wire tool down. "Mr. Callahan." She dismounted, tied the mare to the fence post, turned to face him directly. "I have information you need to hear, and I'd like to be wrong about some of it, so I'm hoping you can tell me I am." Something sharpened in his face. "Say it." "Someone has been systematically cutting water access to the North Valley ranches," she said. "Not through drought, through deliberate diversion. The channel rights were reassigned 7 months ago, without most of the affected ranchers knowing the easement had changed. The reassignment was authorized by a county assessor named Briggs, and the entity that received the new water rights is called Ridgecrest Water Management. 5 ranchers have now sold their land since the water problem started. All 5 sales went to a company called Harrow Valley Holdings. She watched him. "I believe both entities have the same principal. I believe that principal is Wade Prescott." The silence was long enough to be its own kind of answer. "That's the same playbook," Jude said quietly. "His father, different mechanism." His voice was flat and controlled, the way a man's voice gets when he's angry at something that's also terrifying. "Harlan used a boundary dispute, manufactured a survey error, got Briggs to certify it, same Briggs, and tied me up in county court for a year and a half." His jaw tightened. "I didn't know Briggs was involved then. I knew something was wrong with the survey, but I couldn't prove who'd paid to make it wrong." "The record of Briggs's involvement is in the deed office," she said. "I saw his signature today." In plain sight. Hidden in routine authorization paperwork. The kind a person wouldn't notice unless they were looking for a pattern across multiple transactions. She paused. He didn't expect anyone to look. Jude's eyes were steady on her face. "What do you need from me?" "3 things," she said. "I need to know if your water supply has been affected." "East tributary's been running low since May," he said. "I thought it was seasonal." "It's not," she said. "Second, I need to know if you still have your documentation from the boundary dispute. Every record, every court filing, every correspondence. In a locked box under my bed, he said without hesitation. Good. Third, I need to know if you trust anyone in this town with institutional authority. A judge, a circuit marshal, a territorial representative. Anyone whose integrity isn't already part of Prescott's network. He thought about this for a moment. The pause was honest. She could see him actually reviewing names, not stalling. There's a federal land agent, he said. Name of Cole. He works the territory out of Missoula. He came through here twice in the past 3 years, and he's one of the few men I've met in a government post who seems to actually understand what the post is for. He looked at her. He's not local. That's either a problem or an advantage. It's an advantage, she said immediately. Prescott's influence is local. A federal agent operates outside it. Jude nodded slowly. I need to build the case first, she said. Enough documentation that when we present it, it can't be ignored or quietly buried. That means I need time, and I need access to records I can't get on my own authority. How much time? 2 weeks, maybe less. He was quiet, looking at the pasture, at the line of fence he'd been mending, at the mountain above them. Another ranch sold this morning, she said quietly. Henderson. She saw it move through him, not visible in any single gesture, but in the way his stillness shifted quality, from deliberate to weighted. Bob Henderson's been here longer than I have, he said. I know. His father built that ranch. I know, she said again. And I'm sorry. But if we move before we have enough, we lose. Prescott will know someone's looking, and he'll accelerate. The remaining ranchers will lose their land in days instead of months. Jude turned back to her. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. It wasn't quite trust, not yet. But it was something adjacent to it. The look of a man deciding whether to put his weight on a bridge he hasn't yet tested. What do I do? He said. Go through your court documents from the boundary dispute, she said. Write down every name, every official, every witness, every lawyer. Bring them to me at the Mercantile day after tomorrow, early, before Prescott comes in. He comes in on Thursdays, Jude said. Then I need you there Wednesday night. He looked at her. Horace will leave the side door unlocked, she said. I'll be there. A long pause. You've done this before, he said. It was the same thing he'd said at the bridge. The same recognition, slightly different understanding behind it. Someone did this to my family, she said. I was 23. I didn't know what I was looking at until it was too late. She held his gaze. I know what I'm looking at now. He picked up the wire tool, set it on the fence post. Wednesday night, he said. I'll be there. She rode back down the mountain in the long summer evening light, and she was halfway to town when she heard the horse behind her. She didn't panic. She kept her pace and listened. One rider, moving deliberately, not aggressively. She turned enough to look back. It was one of Wade Prescott's men. She recognized him from the saloon, a broad-weathered man named Decker who worked Prescott's North Range and who had twice in the past week been in the Mercantile when she was working. She hadn't thought much of it then. She thought a great deal about it now. He didn't approach her. He just rode, at a distance. The same road, the same direction, the same easy pace. Not hiding, not threatening, just present. She made herself breathe slow. She turned back toward the road ahead and kept riding. He followed her all the way to the edge of town. When she turned into the Mercantile's side alley, he stopped at the corner of Main Street and watched her dismount. Then he turned his horse and rode back the way they'd come. She stood in the alley for a moment after he was gone. Then she went inside. Someone knows I went up the mountain, she told Horace. He set down his pen. Prescott's man, Decker. He followed me back from the Callahan ranch. Not close enough to be threatening, close enough to be a message. Horace was quiet for a moment. Means somebody told him you went up. Or someone saw me leave town and guessed the destination. She put her satchel on the counter and began laying out her notes. Either way, we have less time than I thought. What do you need? She looked at her notes, looked at Horace. I need access to every bill of sale and deed transfer record in your files going back 2 years, she said. And I need you to tell me who in this town you would trust with your life." Horace didn't hesitate. "Jude Callahan." "Who else?" He thought longer this time. "Ruth Carey. Runs the boarding house. She doesn't talk. Ever." He paused. "And maybe Tom Aldridge. He's the smith. Lost his grazing lease 2 years ago in circumstances nobody understood at the time. He's got no love for Prescott and no reason to pretend he does." 3 people. It wasn't much. It was enough to start. The next day, Wednesday, brought the kind of heat that makes people careless. Clara was careful. She spent the morning at the Mercantile working through Horace's files with the systematic efficiency she'd learned to apply to this kind of work, the work of finding the shape of a crime inside the ordinary paperwork of commerce. By noon, she had a stack of relevant documents cross-referenced and annotated in her careful hand. At 1 in the afternoon, Wade Prescott came in. I wasn't supposed to. He was a Thursday man. But he came through the door at 1 o'clock with a bottle of something expensive and the easy, expansive energy of a man who has recently done something that pleased him. Clara kept her expression neutral. She kept working. He greeted Horace with the warmth of someone who understands that warmth is a tool. Then he turned to Clara with the particular attention he'd never given her before. "Miss Sutton." He set the bottle on the counter and leaned against it. "Word is, you've been doing exceptional work for Horace here." "I'm doing the job I was hired to do," she said. "Horace says you've been going through the old records, 2 years back." She looked up at him. "Account reconciliation. There were some discrepancies in the historical ledger that needed to be resolved." Discrepancies. He repeated the word with the pleasantness of a man who doesn't believe her and wants her to know he doesn't believe her without saying so directly. "Anything concerning, nothing that can't be explained," she said. They looked at each other. It was the kind of exchange that has almost nothing to do with the words being said. She could feel him measuring her, how much she knew, how much she'd communicated, how much of a problem she was likely to become. She could feel him deciding. She kept her face completely still. "Well," he said pleasantly. He picked up his bottle. "I'm sure Horace keeps excellent records. Man's been at this long enough." He nodded to her. "Miss Sutton, good afternoon." He left. She waited until she heard his horse move off down the street. Then she looked at Horace. Horace looked back at her. "He never comes in on Wednesday," Horace said. "No," she said. "He doesn't." She looked at the stack of documents on the counter. "I need to move these somewhere he can't access them," she said. "Tonight before Jude comes." "Ruth Carey," Horace said immediately. "The boarding house. She's got a strong box." Clara nodded. She gathered the documents. She put them in her satchel. "Horace," she said at the door, "lock your files tonight." "I always do," he said. "Lock them better," she said. She was at the boarding house at 4 o'clock. Ruth Carey was a woman of 60-something who had the economical manner of someone who has decided over many decades that most things people say out loud would be better left unsaid. She listened to Clara's compressed explanation with complete attention and zero interruption. Then she unlocked the strongbox at the back of her storage room and held out her hand. Clara put the documents in. Ruth locked the box, put the key in her apron pocket. "Anyone asks, those are my tax records," she said. "Nobody asks about a widow woman's tax records." "Thank you," Clara said. Ruth looked at her with the particular directness of a woman who has seen several generations of trouble walk through her door. "Be careful of Prescott," she said. "His father was dangerous in a way you could see. Wade's dangerous in a way you can't." "I know," Clara said. "Do you know what happened to the last person who put together a case against Harlan Prescott?" Clara was quiet. "He left town," Ruth said. "In the night. Voluntarily," he said. Nobody who knew him believed it. She met Clara's eyes. "I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you not to be alone when this moves." Jude arrived at the Mercantile at 9 that night. He had a leather satchel with him, documents clearly. He came in through the side door Horace had left unlocked, and he moved with the quiet economy of a man accustomed to doing things without drawing attention. Clara had laid out her notes on the back table with a lamp between them. Horace had gone home because she'd told him to, and because he trusted her judgment, which she had not expected and was grateful for. Jude set his satchel on the table and looked at what she'd assembled. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long did it take you to build this?" "The framework, 3 days. The evidence to support it, a lot of other people suffering over a long time." He sat down, opened his own satchel, and began laying his documents alongside hers. She watched him work the way he moved through the papers, finding things by memory, pausing at certain names. There was a grimness to it. So, something else. Focus. "Briggs," he said, stopping at one of his own documents. "He signed the survey certification in my case, witness of record." He looked up. "Same man." "Same man," she confirmed. "Different mechanism, same structure. 2 different schemes for the same goal," he said. "How long has the family been doing this?" "At least 12 years based on what I can trace," she said. "The water rights scheme is newer, more sophisticated." Jude sat back in his chair. "Cole," he said. "The federal agent. I'll reach out to him tomorrow." "I'll write the communication," she said. "If you'll allow me, it needs to be structured in a specific way." He looked at her across the table. The lamplight put shadows under his eyes and made him look older and more certain at the same time. "You're not doing this for me," he said. "Or for the other ranchers." She met his look steadily. "No." "Who is it for?" She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, just honest. "My father sold hardware," she said. "For 15 years. He was good at it, and he was honest, and he saved enough to send me to a women's institute in Omaha for 2 years, which is more than most men in his position would have done. When he died, he left the business to my mother and me." She paused. "A man came with paperwork. A contract my father had allegedly signed that gave him right of first purchase on the business in the event of my father's death. My mother didn't know enough about legal documents to know it was manufactured. I didn't know enough then either." She looked at the papers between them. "We lost everything in 30 days. And the man who did it never answered for it. Because he had friends in the county office, and we had no one." She looked up. "So no, it's not for you. It's for the version of me that was 23 and didn't know what she was looking at." The silence between them was a different kind of silence than the ones they'd shared before. Less cautious, more honest. "Did you ever find out what happened to him?" Jude asked. "The man who took your family's business. He sold it 18 months later," she said. "For twice what it was worth. He's somewhere prosperous and comfortable and completely untroubled." She kept her voice level. "Which is why it matters to document everything correctly the first time, so that when it goes to a judge, there is nothing that can be argued away." Jude looked at his documents, at hers, at the shape of the case between them on the table. "How much more do you need?" he said. "Proof of the water diversion mechanism," she said. "Somewhere physically, someone has altered the channel. I have the paperwork trail. I need someone to go and look at the actual channel and tell me where the interference is." "I know those channels," he said. "I can ride the east tributary line tomorrow." "Don't go alone," she said. He looked at her. "Decker followed me today," she said. "Which means someone is watching movement. If Prescott knows we're building something, he'll act before we're ready. Don't give him an opportunity." She paused. "Take Tom Aldridge. He lost his grazing lease. He has standing and reason." Jude was quiet, assessing. "You know Tom," he said. "Horace mentioned him," she said. "I've observed him. He's not a man who waits around for permission." "No," Jude said. "He's not." Something moved in his expression. "You've been watching this town since the minute you got here." "I always watch," she said. "It's how I stay ahead of the problem." He looked at her steadily. And she saw it, that shift, that slow recalibration that had started at the bridge and had been moving through him increment by increment every time they'd spoken. Not a man falling. A man deciding that his previous map of the territory was insufficient and needed to be redrawn. "I'll get Tom," he said. "Good." She began organizing the documents back into their order. I'll have the communication drafted for the federal agent by morning. He gathered his satchel, stood. He paused at the side door. Miss Sutton. She looked up. When this is over, he said, and then stopped. As if he'd started a sentence he hadn't finished thinking through. She waited. Remind me, he said finally, to stop assuming I know the shape of things before I look at them properly. She held his gaze. I'll remind you, she said. He went out into the summer dark. She sat at the table for a long time after listening to the town settle into its nighttime quiet. The lamp burned low. The documents lay in careful order before her. Somewhere north of town on land that had changed hands under false pretenses and manufactured desperation. The water in the creek channel ran in the direction someone had chosen for it, away from the people who needed it, toward the profit of someone who had none. Not for much longer, she thought. She blew out the lamp and walked out into the night, and the stars above Harrow Creek burned hard and high and indifferent, the way they always did in high summer, the way they would long after every scheme and every fraudulent signature and every deliberate wrong had been answered for. She was going to make sure of it. The letter to Agent Cole went out Thursday morning on the early stage to Missoula. Clara had written it 3 times before she was satisfied. Not because the facts were difficult to organize, they weren't. She had them cold, but because the tone required precision. Too urgent, and it read as hysteria. Too measured, and it failed to convey that people were losing their land right now, not in some theoretical future. She needed it to read like what it was, a documented account of ongoing criminal activity, presented by someone who understood the legal weight of every word she was putting on paper. The final version was 4 pages. It cited specific document numbers, specific dates, specific authorization signatures. It named Briggs. It named Harrow Valley Holdings. It stopped short of naming Prescott directly, because she didn't yet have a document that put his name on the holdings entity, only the circumstantial connection through the co-signed deed and the pattern of transactions. She noted the gap. A good investigator would understand why she'd left it open. Jude had read the letter before she sealed it. He'd read it twice, standing at the back table of the Mercantile in the early morning, before anyone else was in town. When he finished, he set it down carefully like something that could be damaged. "This is good," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "That's what makes it good." He looked at her across the table. "Cole will come. If he's the man you believe he is, yes," she said. "But we can't wait for him. Prescott came in a day early this week. That means his timeline has shortened." "Tom and I ride the East Channel today," he said. "Be back before dark," she said. "And write down everything you find. Distances, materials, anything man-made. Dates if you can estimate them." He nodded. He picked up his hat. She watched him go, and she thought about what Ruth had said. "Don't be alone when this moves." She had been alone most of her adult life by circumstance and by the gradual recognition that most situations were safer when she managed them herself. The idea of relying on other people, on Horace, on Ruth, on Tom Aldridge. She'd never spoken to directly on a mountain rancher who'd made his whole life out of not depending on anyone, felt like standing on something that hadn't yet proved it would hold weight. She had done it anyway. She wasn't sure what to make of that. She opened the Mercantile ledger and started the day's work. Tom Aldridge came into the Mercantile at 10 o'clock. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected Jude to handle the coordination. But Tom walked through the door himself, still carrying the smell of the smithy, and he set his big hands on the counter and looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated manner of a man who has decided to skip the preliminary stages of a conversation. "Jude says you're the one running this," he said. "Jude and I are working together," she said carefully. "Don't dance around it, Miss Sutton. He told me what you put together. The water rights, the holdings company, Briggs." Tom's jaw was tight. "I lost my grazing lease because of a boundary certification, 2 years ago. I always thought that certification was wrong, but I couldn't prove it." "Was it certified by Briggs?" she said. Tom looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "It was." Clara reached for a fresh sheet of paper. "Tell me everything you remember about that certification. Every name, every date, every document you signed." He talked for 40 minutes. She wrote everything down. When he was done, she had added a third fraudulent transaction to her documentation, one that predated the water scheme by 2 years and showed that the Prescott operation had been running longer and with more sophistication than she'd initially mapped. "You know what this means," she said when she'd finished writing. "It means Harlan Prescott started it, and his boy just kept going," Tom said. "It means there's a 12-year pattern," she said. "And a 12-year pattern is not a coincidence. It's a business model." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me besides what I just gave you?" "Witness testimony," she said. "When the time comes. Your account on record in front of a federal authority." He nodded once. No hesitation. "Done." She looked at him. "You understand that between now and then Prescott may become aware that you're involved. That could create difficulties for you." "Miss Sutton," he said with the tired patience of a man who has already calculated the cost of something and paid it in advance. "That man took land. My father worked for 20 years on the strength of a piece of paper that was wrong, and everybody knew it was wrong, and nobody said a damn thing." He pushed back from the counter. "Difficulties don't scare me near as much as doing nothing." He left. Clara sat for a moment with the new documentation in front of her, adding it to the structure she'd been building in her mind. The full shape of the thing, with Tom's information fitting into it, the way a missing piece clarifies a map you thought you already understood. She was so absorbed that she almost didn't hear the bell over the door. She looked up. Decker stood in the doorway. "I wasn't browsing. He wasn't there to buy anything." He stood in the frame of the open door, and he looked at her with the flat, deliberate attention of a message being delivered in person. "Morning, Miss Sutton," he said. "Good morning," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was pleased about that. "Mr. Prescott wanted me to ask whether those account discrepancies you mentioned have been resolved." She held his gaze. "Tell Mr. Prescott the records are in order." "He'll be glad to hear it," Decker said. He didn't move for a moment, just stood there taking up space in the doorway the way a man does when the space is the point. Then he tipped his hat and walked out. Clara waited until his boots were off the porch boards. Then she stood up, walked to the door, and looked out. He crossed the street and went directly into the saloon. She watched him sit down at the window table, the one with the clear sightline to the mercantile front, and order something. He was going to watch the building. She went back inside. She gathered the documents from the back table, all of them, and she put them in her satchel. She carried the satchel to the counter and set it on the shelf underneath behind the bolts of fabric where it looked like a supply order. Then she found Horace. "I need to go to Ruth's," she said quietly. "The documents need to move again." Horace didn't ask why. He looked out the window at the saloon at the window table at Decker's silhouette. "Go out the back," he said. She was back in 20 minutes. Ruth had the documents in the strongbox before Clara had finished explaining. The old woman worked fast for someone her age, and she said nothing until the box was locked. "It's moving faster," Ruth said. "Yes," Clara said. "Does Jude know Decker's watching the mercantile?" "He will when he gets back from the creek." Clara paused. "Ruth, if something happens to me before the federal agent gets here, if I'm pressured to leave, or if I'm removed in some way, the documents are here. Jude knows the case. Tom has his testimony. Horace has the ledger records." Ruth looked at her with the expression of someone who has watched too many people underestimate what they were dealing with. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "I know," Clara said. "I'm just making sure the case doesn't depend on me being present to make it." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would have been proud of you." Clara had not expected that. She stood very still for a moment and then said simply, "Thank you," and went back out through the boarding house garden and around the long way to the mercantile so Decker wouldn't see her return. Jude came back from the creek at 4 in the afternoon. He came in the side door, and Clara knew from the way he moved the clipped, controlled energy of a man who has found what he was looking for and is furious about it, that the east tributary had given them what they needed. "There's a diversion gate," he said before he'd set down his hat. "Half a mile upstream from where the channel splits for the North Valley properties. It's not natural. It's a built structure, recent timber within the past year." redirecting about 60% of the flow east away from the valley properties. She had her pen ready. Dimensions. I gave her everything. Materials, construction style, approximate age. Tom Aldridge, it turned out, had been a smith long enough to recognize hardware. The bolts and brackets on the diversion gate were a specific type made in only one county in the territory. "Can he verify that in testimony?" she said. "He already offered to," Jude said. He looked at her assembled notes. "What happened while I was gone?" She told him about Decker, about the documents moving, about Tom's testimony adding the 12-year pattern. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He knows we're building something," he said. "He suspects," she said. "He doesn't know how far along we are. That's the only advantage we still have." "How long until Cole can get here?" "If the letter reaches Missoula by Saturday, and he reads it Monday a week, perhaps 10 days if he responds immediately." Jude's expression was controlled. "We don't have 10 days. "No," she agreed. "We need to find a way to slow Prescott without letting him know we're doing it." Jude looked at her. "What does that look like?" "It looks like everything appearing normal," she said. "Decker watching the mercantile and seeing routine business. You going about your ranch work. No visible meetings. No obvious coordination." "While we do what exactly?" "While I write 3 more documents," she said. "One is a formal complaint to the territorial governor's office. One is a statement of claim on behalf of the affected ranchers filed under their names, if they'll sign it. One is a public record notice of the water rights reassignment, which legally should have been published and wasn't, which means the reassignment may be procedurally invalid regardless of Briggs's authorization." He stared at her. "The reassignment is invalid." "Possibly," she said. "Water rights changes affecting community easements require public notice under territorial law. I found the statute in a legal guide Horace keeps in the back for contract references. If that notice was never published, and I've checked the Harrow Creek register going back 18 months, and it wasn't, then the reassignment can be challenged on procedural grounds alone, without touching the fraud." The silence was absolute. "That's faster than the federal route," he said. "It's a parallel track," she said. "The procedural challenge can move through the county court immediately. It doesn't require Cole. It buys time and puts the water rights in legal dispute, which means Prescott can't complete any more sales based on water access problems he's legally prevented from creating." Jude sat down slowly. He put his hat on the table and looked at her. "How long have you known about the notice requirement?" he said. "Since yesterday afternoon," she said. "I wanted to verify it before I said anything." "You verified it without telling me." "I told you as soon as I was sure," she said. "Is that a problem?" He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. Then he shook his head, not negatively, shakes his head at something he wasn't expecting and doesn't quite have a category for. "Who files the challenge?" he said. "The affected ranchers," she said. "Or any one of them with standing. You have standing, your water access has been reduced. Tom has standing. The Henderson family has standing, though Bob already sold." She paused. "If you file the challenge tomorrow before Prescott's aware of the procedural angle, it goes into the court record before he can move to stop it. He'll know it's connected to me." "Yes," she said. "He'll know you found a legal thread. He won't know how much of the fabric we've already unraveled." Jude was quiet, looking at the table. Then he said, "I need the 3 ranchers who haven't sold yet to know what's happening. They deserve to know someone is fighting for them before this goes public." "I agree," she said. "But it needs to happen quietly and fast." "I know those men," he said. "I've known them for years. I can ride to each of them tonight." She thought about Decker at the saloon window. "If Decker's watching, a night ride will be noticed." "Let him notice," Jude said. His voice had changed, something harder under it now, something that had been gathering since the creek, since the diversion gate, since the moment that abstract understanding of the scheme had become a physical object built with bolts and timber in the middle of land. These men had worked their whole lives. "I'm a rancher. I ride at night. He can wonder all he wants." She looked at him. This was different from the careful, patient calculation he'd brought to every other decision. This was the controlled anger of a man who has been pushed to the edge of his patience and is now deciding what to do with it. "All right," she said. "Ride tonight. I'll have the challenge documents ready for signatures by morning." He stood, picked up his hat. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She noticed it the way you notice a change in the light. She looked at him. "When this is done," he said, "and it's going to be done because I am not losing another inch of this fight to that family when it's done, I want to know the rest of the story. About Nebraska. About your father." He held her gaze. "If you're willing to tell it." She was quiet for a moment. "Ask me when it's done," she said. He nodded. He went out into the early evening. She picked up her pen. She worked through the night, not because she had to. She could have drafted the documents the next morning with time to spare before the courthouse opened. But the work was the thing that kept her centered, kept the fear from the edges of her thinking, where it lived, and occasionally tried to become larger than it had permission to be. Documents were honest. They said what they said. They didn't shift or soften or agree with you because it was convenient. She trusted them more than she trusted most things. By 2 in the morning, she had the procedural challenge drafted in clean, precise language. By 4, she had the statement of claim with blanks for signatures. By 5, she had the letter to the territorial governor, which was shorter and harder to write than the others, because it required her to be accusatory in a tone that could not be dismissed as emotional. She wrote, "The pattern of transactions described herein represents not a series of individual unfortunate business dealings, but a coordinated scheme of land acquisition through manufactured hardship, conducted with the participation of a county official, and carried out over a period of not less than 12 years. She read it back. She didn't change a word. She was sealing the last envelope when she heard the front door of the Mercantile open. She had not heard footsteps on the porch. She looked up very slowly. Wade Prescott stood in the doorway. He was not carrying his usual bottle, and he was not wearing his usual expression of expansive pleasantness. His face was still, and the stillness was more frightening than any overt threat, because it meant he had already moved past the stage where threats were useful. He closed the door behind him. "Miss Sutton," he said, "working late." She kept both hands visible on the table. "Mr. Prescott, the Mercantile isn't open." "I know." He walked toward her slowly, looking at the papers on the table. Not panicked, curious almost, deliberate. "I had an interesting conversation this afternoon with Garrett Wilson. He mentioned you'd been in the deed office." "I do account reconciliation," she said. "That requires reviewing public records. He mentioned the specific records you pulled." He stopped on the other side of the table. He looked at the documents in front of her, and she watched him read the header of the procedural challenge from upside down. He was fast. She gave him that, and his eyes changed. Not much, just enough. "Those are interesting documents for a bookkeeper to be drafting," he said. "I have a legal background," she said. "Horace finds it useful. I'm sure he does." He looked at her with the full, measured attention he'd never brought to bear on her before this moment. "Who else have you been talking to, Miss Sutton, besides old Horace?" She said nothing. "The thing about small towns," he said conversationally, "is that people talk, especially to people they've known for years, people they trust." He tilted his head slightly. "I've known most of the people in this town for years, considerably longer than you have." She understood the threat. It was elegant in its way. Not "I will hurt you," just "I already know more than you think, and I have more loyalty here than you do, and you are alone." She thought about Ruth, about Horace, about Jude riding in the dark to 3 different ranches, about Tom Aldridge and his steady, unsentimental offer of testimony. She was not alone. That was the part he didn't know yet. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "the procedural challenge to the water rights reassignment will be filed when the courthouse opens in the morning. The relevant statute is clear. The notice requirement was not met. That's a matter of public record, not personal allegation, and there is nothing you can say to me tonight that changes what the law says." He looked at her. "You should go home," she said. "I have work to finish." The silence stretched. She held his gaze, and she did not look away, and she did not let her hands move because her hands wanted to shake, and she was not going to let them. Prescott reached out and picked up the envelope that contained the governor's letter. She said evenly, "That is sealed correspondence addressed to the territorial governor's office. If you open it, that is a separate criminal matter." His hand stopped. He set the envelope down. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "I've made mistakes before," she said. "They weren't made in writing. Neither is this." He left. She sat very still for a full minute after the door closed. Then she got up, walked to the side door, and went out the back way to Ruth's. She knocked until Ruth answered. "Prescott just came into the mercantile," she said. Ruth looked at her face for a second. Then she said, "Come in." "He's going to move fast," Clara said, "before the courthouse opens." "Can the filing wait?" "No, it has to go in as soon as Garrett Wilson opens that door." Ruth nodded slowly. "I'll send word to Jude tonight, before he finishes his rides. He needs to be at that courthouse when it opens." She paused. "And you need to not be alone tonight." Clara looked at the older woman in the lamplight. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine," Ruth said firmly. "I said you're not sleeping alone tonight. Come inside." For the second time in the span of a week, Clara Sutton did something she was not accustomed to doing. She accepted help. She came inside. She let someone else lock the door. She sat at Ruth's kitchen table while the old woman made coffee she didn't need and wouldn't drink, and she put her hands flat on the table and let them shake for about 30 seconds. 30 seconds was all she allowed. Then she picked up the coffee cup and held it and let the warmth come through the ceramic, and she thought about what needed to happen in the next 6 hours, in what order, with what she had available. She thought about Jude Callahan, riding in the dark through the mountain roads going one by one to men who had been waiting for someone to show up. She thought about him saying, "When this is done, I want to know the rest of the story." She thought about the way he'd said her name for the first time, direct and simple, like a fact being acknowledged. She thought, "Hold on until morning." Morning came slowly, and then all at once the way it does in high summer, and when the first real light hit the window, Ruth was already up, and Clara had slept 3 hours at the kitchen table with her head on her arms, which was more than she'd expected. Jude knocked on Ruth's door at 6:30. He had 3 signatures. Every remaining North Valley rancher, all 3 men had signed the statement of claim in the dark of their own kitchens the night before. She could see the effort of the night in the lines around his eyes. She could also see something else. The quiet, settled quality of a man who has moved from deciding to do something to having done it. He handed her the signed documents. She looked at the signatures. 3 names. 3 men who had trusted him enough to sign their names to a legal claim in the middle of the night. "How did they take it?" she said. "Ed Marsh cried," he said. "Then he said he'd sign anything that put it right." He paused. "Frank Dutton asked if you were sure. I said yes. He signed." She looked up at him. "The third," she said. "Pete Garner asked who you were," he said. "I told him you were the most careful person I'd ever seen with a legal document, and that was enough for him." She held the signatures for a moment. Then she handed him the procedural challenge document. "Read it," she said. "If there's anything you'd change, now is the time." He read it, standing up quickly the way he did most things. When he finished, he handed it back without a word. "Nothing to change," she said. "Not one word," he said. She put the documents in her satchel. "The courthouse opens at 8, she said. "It's 6:45, he said. "I know," she said. "We're going to be standing on the steps when Garrett Wilson arrives." Jude looked at her. He's more likely to accept the filing without obstruction if it's presented by a rancher with legal standing than a woman he's already dismissed," she said. "You present it. I stand behind you with the documentation." He shook his head, that same not negative motion. "And if Wilson tries to delay, then I quote him the statute section and subsection and explain that a deliberate delay in accepting a legally valid filing constitutes a dereliction of duty under territorial code." "You have that memorized?" "I wrote it down," she said. "But yes." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing she'd seen to it on his face, a warmth that moved in quickly and was gone before it fully formed, like heat lightning in the mountains. "Let's go," he said. They walked out into the early morning together, through the summer light that was already turning golden and hot at the edges, through the quiet streets of a town that was not yet aware of what was about to be placed into its official record. And Clara Sutton walked with her satchel over her shoulder and her notes in order, and her heart moving fast in her chest at a rhythm she chose to interpret as readiness. Garrett Wilson arrived at the courthouse at 8:03 to find Jude Callahan standing on the steps with a woman he recognized from the deed office and an expression on his face that made Wilson stop walking 2 steps short of the door. "Morning, Garrett," Jude said. Wilson looked at Clara, at Jude, at the satchel. "Jude," he said carefully, "something I can help you with." "We're filing a procedural challenge," Jude said. "Water rights reassignment. Failure to meet public notice requirements under Territorial Statute Section 14 subsection 3. He didn't look at Clara for the reference. He'd read it in the document, and it had stayed with him. "We have standing, we have documentation, and we have the statute." Wilson looked at him for a long calculated moment. Then he unlocked the courthouse door. "Come in," he said. Clara followed them inside, and she kept her face composed, and she thought, one more step, one more step, one more step. The filing went into the record at 8:11 in the morning. Wade Prescott found out at 9:45 when Decker rode back from the courthouse with the news, and at 10:15 when Clara was standing at the mercantile counter reviewing the day's accounts as though nothing had changed. The front door opened, and she heard the sound of boots on the floorboards. Not Prescott's easy swagger, but something faster, less controlled, and she looked up. Prescott stood in the doorway. He was not pleasant this time. His face had the tight, concentrated look of a man who has just watched something he thought he controlled move outside his reach. "You filed," he said. "Horace files a great deal of paperwork," she said. "Don't." His voice was level, but stripped of the warmth he usually kept over it like a coat. "You know what I mean." She set down her pen. She looked at him directly. "A procedural challenge is a legal instrument," she said, "available to any citizen with standing under territorial law. 3 ranchers with affected water access signed the filing. The documentation is complete and in the court record." She paused. "If the water rights reassignment was executed correctly, the challenge will be dismissed and nothing changes. If it wasn't, the reassignment is invalidated and the community easement is restored." She looked at him calmly. "The law is the law, Mr. Prescott. I didn't write it." The silence in the mercantile was total. Prescott looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating what he could threaten, what he could take back, how much she already had, and whether there was any move left that would stop the thing she'd put in motion. She let him calculate. She already knew the answer. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what you've started." "I have every idea," she said. "That's why I started it carefully." He left. The door swung shut behind him. Horace came out of the back room and looked at the door and then looked at Clara. "Well," Horace said. "Well," she agreed. She picked up her pen. Her hand was steady. Outside somewhere north of town, the water in the east. Tributary ran in the direction someone had redirected it, but not if she had anything to say about it for much longer. The filing was in the record. The signatures were in the record. The statute was clear, and it didn't care who Prescott's friends were. Cole's response would come. She had built the case to hold until it did. And the thing about a structure built carefully, she knew from documents, from bridges, from everything that mattered and needed to last, was that when it held completely. She returned to the ledger. She returned to the work. The procedural challenge sat in the courthouse record like a lit fuse. Prescott knew it. Clara knew it. And for the 3 days following the filing, Harrow Creek moved through its ordinary business with the particular tension of a town that senses something coming, but hasn't yet agreed on what to call it. Decker stopped watching the mercantile from the saloon window. That was the first thing Clara noticed, and it troubled her more than the watching had. A man who stops surveillance has either given up or changed tactics, and Wade Prescott was not a man who gave up. The second thing she noticed was that Garrett Wilson left town on Friday morning on the stage to the county seat. He told 2 people he was visiting his sister. He had no sister that anyone in Harrow Creek knew about. She told Jude on Friday afternoon when he came into the mercantile on the pretext of a supply order he didn't actually need. "Wilson's gone to the county seat," she said without looking up from the ledger. Her voice was low and even. "He left this morning." Jude set his supply list on the counter. "Prescott sent him." "Almost certainly," she said. "The county judge handles challenges to water rights filings. If Wilson gets to him before we do, can he have it dismissed without a hearing?" "He can have it delayed," she said. "Long enough for Prescott to complete whatever he's planning." She paused. "Or he can argue that the filing was improperly submitted and have it returned." "On what grounds?" "He'll find grounds," she said. "That's what he does." Jude was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do we do?" She had been thinking about this since Friday morning, since she'd watched the stage roll out of town with Wilson on it. She had turned it over and over, the way she turned legal problems, looking at every edge testing, every seam. "We go above the county," she said. "The governor's letter went out with the Cole letter, but we need someone physically present at the territorial level before Wilson can manufacture a reason to return the filing." She looked up at him. "Is there anyone you trust who can ride to the territorial capital?" Jude looked at her steadily. "I can ride." "You're the primary filer," she said. "If you leave Harrow Creek right now, Prescott will move on the remaining ranches within 48 hours. He's been waiting for an opening." "Then who?" "Tom," she said. "Tom Aldridge. He has his own grievance on record, and he has no property left for Prescott to threaten. He's the safest person to send." Jude thought for exactly 4 seconds. "I'll ask him tonight." "Ask him now," she said. "He needs to leave by morning." Tom Aldridge said yes before Jude finished the sentence. Clara had drafted the supplemental letter to the Territorial Land Office by the time Tom came by the mercantile at dusk to collect it. He read it standing up the way Jude read things, and he asked one question. "Who do I give this to when I get there?" "The Territorial Land Commissioner," she said. "His name is Arthur Vance. He's appointed, not elected, which means Prescott's county connections don't reach him directly." She handed Tom a second smaller envelope. "That one is a personal letter of introduction from Horace. He and Vance did business together in the 70s. It establishes that I'm working in an official capacity and that the documentation is legitimate." Tom looked at the 2 envelopes. "You thought of everything." "I thought of the things I could think of," she said. "Ride fast." He left before full dark. She stood in the empty mercantile afterward, listening to the quiet. Horace had gone home. The street outside was settling into its evening sounds. Somewhere in the distance cattle were moving. She thought 3 tracks now. The procedural challenge in county court. Cole coming from Missoula. Tom riding to the territorial capital. 3 lines running toward the same point from different directions at different speeds. One of them would arrive first. She didn't know which. She locked the mercantile and went back to Ruth's. She slept 4 hours. It was the most she'd managed in a week. Saturday morning arrived with a heat that had teeth in it, the kind of July heat that makes animals irritable and men reckless. Clara felt it the moment she stepped outside, and she thought this is the kind of day when things happen that people later say they didn't plan. She was at the mercantile by 7. At 7:30, Vera Halston came through the door. Clara looked up with the neutral expression she kept ready for anything unexpected. Vera was not a woman who came to the mercantile early on Saturdays. She was a woman who made a point of arriving at things after they were already properly underway. But Vera came in at 7:30, and she closed the door behind her, and she stood on the customer side of the counter, looking at Clara with an expression that had something in it Clara hadn't seen there before. Discomfort. Genuine, unmanaged discomfort. "Miss Sutton," she said. "Mrs. Halston," Clara said. A pause. Vera straightened the cuff of her sleeve. A nervous gesture Clara noted from a woman who did not appear to have nervous gestures. "I heard about the filing," Vera said. "The water rights challenge." "It's public record," Clara said. "Yes." Another pause. "My husband's property backs the North Valley drainage on the east side. We've had—" She stopped, restarted. The water pressure at our stock trough has been low for 6 months. I thought it was seasonal. Clara kept her expression careful. When did you first notice the change? March, Vera said. Early March. Did you speak to anyone about it? I spoke to Wade Prescott, Vera said. At the spring social. He said the creek was running low because of the dry winter, and it would correct itself by summer. She met Clara's eyes. It's July. Silence. Mrs. Halston, Clara said carefully. The water diversion structure on the east tributary was constructed within the past year. It's redirecting approximately 60% of the North Valley flow. Your property would be affected by the same mechanism as the ranches that are already part of the filing. Vera's face went through several things in rapid sequence. Clara watched her absorb it, the confirmation that what she'd suspected but hadn't allowed herself to fully think was true, and the particular specific anger of a woman who has been condescended to about something she turned out to be right about. He lied to me, she said, not a question. He gave you an explanation that served his interests, Clara said. Whether that constitutes lying depends on how generous you want to be. I'm not feeling generous, Vera said flatly. Then yes, Clara said. He lied to you. Another silence. Vera looked at the counter, at her own hands. What would it take, she said slowly, to add the Halston property to that filing? Clara reached under the counter. She put a blank statement of claim on the counter between them. Your signature, she said, and your husband's. Vera looked at the document. She looked at Clara. I told you, she said, and her voice had a quality in it that Clara recognized because she'd heard it in her own voice in other rooms, in other hard moments, that Harrow Creek had managed its own affairs without assistance. You did, Clara said. I was wrong, Vera said. She picked up the pen. Henry Halston signed the document that afternoon, and something shifted in the town. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't loud. But Vera Halston was not an invisible woman. When she spoke to people, people adjusted. And by Saturday evening, the information moving through Harrow Creek had changed direction. It was no longer the story of a stranger with inconvenient opinions about infrastructure. It was something else. Something that had Vera Halston's name attached to it, and Henry Halston's signature on a legal document, and the weight of a family who had been in this town long enough to know where all the bones were buried. Clara heard the shift, the way she heard most things in accumulation, in the changed quality of how people greeted her when she passed on the street. Not warmth, not exactly. But the withdrawal of the specific coolness they'd offered before. A man tipped his hat who hadn't before. Two women at the dry goods store stopped their conversation when she passed, not in the dismissive way they had before, but in the attentive way, the way people pause when someone they've just reassessed walks by. She noted it. She didn't trust it. She had learned a long time ago that a town's opinion of you is a weather system. It can change direction without warning, and for reasons that have nothing to do with you personally. The same people who were tipping hats on Saturday could be looking away on Monday. Approval that came this quickly and this conditionally wasn't something to build on. But she would use the window it created, that she understood. The first real crack came Sunday. She was at Ruth's in the early afternoon when Jude knocked. He came in with the contained, purposeful energy she'd come to associate with him having information he needed to move fast. Pete Garner's barn, he said. She went still. What happened? Caught fire this morning, before dawn. His voice was controlled. Too controlled the way a man's voice gets when he's working very hard to stay on the right side of something. Nobody was hurt, but the hay stores are gone, all of them. Accident, Ruth said from the kitchen doorway. Jude looked at her. The fire started in two places at once. The room was quiet. Pete's one of the three who signed the filing, Clara said. Yeah, Jude said. He is. She stood up. Her mind was moving fast, sorting, arranging. This changes the timeline. Prescott is escalating because the filing rattled him. He's trying to pressure the signatories into withdrawing before the challenge can be heard. Will it work? Ruth asked. Not with Pete, Jude said with a certainty that told her he'd already spoken to the man. Pete told me this morning his exact words were, "They burned my hay, not my backbone." A pause. He's angrier now than he was before. "The fire needs to be on record," Clara said. "Officially reported and officially documented as suspicious. If it goes into the county record as a probable arson connected to the timing of the filing, it becomes evidence in a pattern of intimidation. That pattern supports the federal case." "Who reports it?" Jude asked. "Pete primarily, but you as a witness to the discovery and the two-point origin." She looked at it. "Can you write out what you observed, time, location, the two ignition points in your own words, not mine?" "Today," he said. "This afternoon," she said. "Before anything else happens that changes what you remember." She reached for paper. "And Jude, this is important when you write it, don't characterize. Don't say it was arson. Don't say Prescott's name. Just describe exactly what you saw. Facts only. Let the facts say what they say." He looked at her steadily. "You're protecting the document from being challenged." "I'm protecting the document from being dismissed as accusatory without evidence," she said. "There's a difference between a witness account and an allegation. Right now, we need witness accounts." He took the paper. He sat at Ruth's kitchen table, and he wrote, and she watched him work the slow, careful hand of a man who does not write often, but means every word when he does. And she thought about Pete Garner's barn, and about the specific quality of cruelty in burning a man's winter stores in high summer when the season for replacing them was already running short. Prescott was afraid. That was what the fire said. Afraid and running out of patience. Afraid people do stupid things. Stupid things leave evidence. She thought, hold. The twist came Monday morning, and it didn't come from Prescott. It came from Garrett Wilson. Wilson returned from the county seat on the Sunday evening stage, and Clara knew before he arrived Ruth had a friend who watched the stage office, that he'd come back without what he'd gone for. The county judge, whose name was Hargrove, had declined to delay or dismiss the procedural challenge without a formal hearing. More than that, Hargrove had scheduled the hearing for Wednesday, 3 days away. That was not what Prescott had sent Wilson to accomplish. Clara sat with this for a long time. A hearing in 3 days meant the challenge would be heard before Cole arrived, before Tom reached the territorial capital, before any of the federal tracks came through. The county hearing would run on county evidence, county law, county procedure. It would be just her documentation, and Jude's standing, and the statute against whatever Prescott brought to that courtroom. She needed her case to be airtight. More than that, she needed it to be so clearly and completely correct that even a judge under Prescott's influence couldn't find a procedural reason to rule against it. She spent Sunday night going through every document she had, every piece of the case, looking for gaps the way a carpenter looks for rot, not hoping to find it, but needing to know if it's there. At 2 in the morning, she found something she hadn't expected. It was in Jude's court documents from the boundary dispute 3 years earlier. She'd been through them twice before, but this time she caught something she'd filed away without fully processing a name in the correspondence section. A lawyer in Billings, who had written a letter on Jude's behalf to the county court, arguing against the survey certification. The lawyer's name was Frederick Ansell. Clara knew that name. She sat with the paper in her hand for a long time. Frederick Ansell had been her family's lawyer in Nebraska. 12 years ago, when the fraudulent contract came, he was the man her mother had gone to. He had reviewed the contract and told them there was nothing to be done. 3 years ago, he had written a letter arguing against a fraudulent survey certification. She turned the letter over, looked at the date, looked at the case reference at the top. Then she looked at the bottom of the letter where Ansell had written a final line that she had read before, without its full significance landing. "I have seen this mechanism before, in another jurisdiction. The pattern is consistent with coordinated fraud. I strongly recommend federal review." He had known. 3 years ago, he had recognized the pattern and recommended federal review. She put the letter down carefully. Her hands were not shaking. She was past the point where her hands shook at things. She thought Frederick Ansell is still in Billings. And if he recognized this pattern 3 years ago, he has documentation. He has his own records of what he saw. And a lawyer's testimony about a consistent pattern of fraud across jurisdictions over more than a decade is worth more than almost anything else she had. She wrote the letter at 3 in the morning. She had it ready for the dawn stage. Chate. She didn't sleep. She went to the mercantile at 6, and she was at the counter when Jude arrived at 7 with the purposefulness that meant he'd been thinking all night too. He stopped when he saw her face. "What did you find?" he said. She told him about Ansel. She watched him absorb it, the shock of it, the particular strangeness of discovering that the story you thought you were in is longer and more connected than you knew. "He wrote me that letter and never followed up," Jude said. "I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just a Billings lawyer taking cases." "He may have been warned off," she said. "Or he may have hit the same wall you did, pattern recognition without enough documentation to move forward." She paused. "Now there's documentation. If he responds before Wednesday's hearing..." "It's a 3-day ride to Billings," Jude said. "It's a 1-day telegraph," she said. He looked at her. "Harrow Creek has a telegraph office," she said. "I drafted the message this morning." She put it on the counter. "It asks Ansel to send his case notes by wire if he can, and to present himself at the Harrow Creek courthouse on Wednesday if he's able. It explains the hearing. It cites the statute." Jude read the message. He set it down. "You've been up all night," he said. "I sleep when it's over," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Not the measured, recalibrating look he'd given her in the early days. Something different, more direct, less cautious. "Clara," he said, "after Wednesday, regardless of what happens at that hearing, I want you to know something." She waited. "I've been running this ranch for 11 years, he said. "Alone. Not because I couldn't use help, because I stopped trusting people to do what they said they would." He looked at his hands on the counter. "My father lost everything to a man he trusted. I watched it happen when I was 17. And I swore I wasn't going to be the person who got caught assuming good faith." She said nothing. She let him find the words. "You came to my fence line on a borrowed horse," he said, "and you told me things that required me to trust you before I had any reason to. And I did." He looked up at her. "Not because you asked me to, because you were right about every single thing you said." She held his gaze. "I'm not right about everything," she said. "You're right about the things that matter," he said. "And you knew which things those were." A pause. "That's not common, Clara. That's not something I expected to find in this town or any other." The mercantile was quiet. The morning light was coming through the front window and laying itself across the floorboards in long, warm strips. "Tell me the rest of the story," he said. "Nebraska. Your father. What happened after?" She looked at him. "Now," she said. "Now," he said. "While we still have a few minutes before the town wakes up." She took a breath. And then, for the first time in a very long time, she told it to someone who wasn't asking for evidence. She told him about the hardware store. About the years her father spent building something worth having, and the 15 months he spent dying, and the 30 days after he was gone, when a man with a fraudulent contract walked in and took everything. She told him about her mother's face the morning they signed the papers. About Ansel reviewing the contract and shaking his head. About the 2 years she spent in a rooming house in Omaha, working as a typist and studying every legal document she could get her hands on, because she had decided that she was never again going to be standing in a room with a piece of paper she didn't understand. She told him about the other towns. The pattern she'd recognized over and over, different mechanisms, different men, same fundamental crime. The theft of what ordinary people spent ordinary lives building. She told him about Billings, about the advertisement in the territorial paper, about arriving in Harrow Creek with $11 and a letter promising a position as a bookkeeper's assistant, and stepping off the stage and crossing the Harrow Bridge and seeing the rot in the left sideboards. She stopped there. "And I thought," she said quietly, "I thought this is a town where things are failing that nobody has noticed yet. And I didn't know if I would be here long enough to matter." She paused. "I still don't." Jude had been still through all of it, completely still the way he was when he was giving something his full attention and wanted it to know he was doing so. "You've already mattered," he said. She looked away. Not because she disagreed, because the directness of it hit something she hadn't known was unguarded. "The telegraph," she said. "It needs to go before 8. "I'll take it," he said. He picked up the message. He turned it in his hands. "Clara," he said. "Jude," she said. "When this is over." He said it the same way he'd said it before, the beginning of a sentence he was still finding the shape of. But this time he continued. "I'm not asking you to stay because I need someone to run the ranch accounts. I can do that myself." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to stay because the last 3 weeks have been the first time in 11 years that I've walked into a room and found the problem already half solved by someone I hadn't expected." He paused. "That matters to me, considerably." She was quiet for a moment. "Send the telegraph," she said. "Win the hearing. Then ask me again." He almost smiled, the full version this time. She caught it before it was gone. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He went out. She turned back to the ledger. Her hands were steady. Something in her chest was considerably less steady, and she gave it exactly 30 seconds. The same 30 seconds. She gave the shaking hands before she set it aside and focused on what needed to happen in the next 48 hours. The telegraph response from Frederick Ansell arrived at 2 in the afternoon. It was 4 lines long. "I remember the Callahan case. I remember the pattern. I have documentation. I will be in Harrow Creek Tuesday evening." Ansell Clara read it twice. Then she walked to the front window and looked out at the street of Harrow Creek at its ordinary midday motion. 2 women crossing toward the dry goods store, a wagon being unloaded at the feed supplier, a dog sleeping under the bench outside the barber shop. She thought about her father, about the hardware store, about the man who'd walked in with fraudulent paperwork and walked out with a business and never answered for it. She thought this one is going to answer for it. She folded Ansell's telegram and put it in her satchel. There were 22 hours until Tuesday evening. 18 hours after that until Wednesday's hearing. She went back to work. Tuesday came and went in the controlled, deliberate way of a day when you are waiting for something and you cannot afford to let the waiting make you careless. Ansell arrived on the evening stage. He was a man of 60, compact and sharp-eyed, with the permanently watchful expression of someone who has spent a lifetime reading what people don't say out loud. He recognized Clara before she introduced herself. "You write the way your father talked," he said. Direct. She had not expected that. She felt the familiar tightening in her throat, and she set it aside. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I should have done more the first time," he said. It was a simple statement, no performance of guilt in it, just a fact he'd been carrying. "What do you need from me?" "Your case notes from the Callahan boundary dispute. Any communications with county officials. Any pattern documentation." She paused. "And testimony at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in the Harrow Creek courthouse." "Is it the same judge, county circuit judge named Hargrove?" she said. "Not Prescott's man as far as we know, but untested." "Hargrove," Ansell said. He looked at something in the middle distance. "I know that name. He was admitted to the bar in '69, went through Cheyenne before he came north." A pause. "He's not corrupt. He's cautious. Those aren't the same thing, but in a courtroom, careful handling makes the difference." "Then we handle it carefully," she said. He nodded. "Show me what you have." They worked until midnight, the 3 of them. Clara, Jude, and Ansell at the back table of the mercantile with Horace's lamp burning between them and the documents spread out in the order she'd built them over the past 3 weeks. Ansell moved through them with the speed of a man who knows exactly what he's looking for, because he's seen the shape of it before. At 11:30, he looked up from the last document. "This is the most complete documentation I've seen of this kind of scheme," he said. "In 30 years of practice." He looked at Clara. "You did this in 3 weeks." "Other people contributed," she said. "But you built the structure," he said. "You understood which pieces connected to which." He set the document down. "Whoever taught you to read legal papers taught you well." "My father," she said. "And about 7 years of being determined not to be helpless again." Ansell looked at her for a moment. Then he said quietly, "He would have been proud of you, Clara." She heard it this time differently than when Ruth had said it, because Ansel had known her father had sat across a desk from him, and the words carried a specificity that the same words from someone who hadn't known him couldn't. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Ansel." He gathered his papers. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock." 10 o'clock, she confirmed. Jude walked Ansel to the boarding house. Clara stayed at the table alone with the documents one more time. She looked at what they had built, the full architecture of the case laid out in careful order. 12 years of a family's fraud mapped from the first forged survey to the water diversion gate on the east tributary. 5 properties taken. 1 property threatened. A county official compromised. A procedural violation that invalidated the water rights change. Witness testimony from men who had lost things they'd spent lifetimes building. A lawyer who had seen the pattern before and could testify to its consistency. A federal agent somewhere between Missoula and Harrow Creek. A territorial commissioner somewhere between the capital and here. It was not a perfect case. No case was perfect. It was complete. It was documented. It was truthful. She put the papers in order for the last time and set them ready for morning. Jude came back quietly. He didn't say anything immediately. He sat down across from her at the table in the way he sat when he had things to think through. "How are you?" he said, simply directly. She considered giving him a practical answer. She gave him a true one instead. "Tired," she said, "and ready." He nodded. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, you should know that what you did here in this town for these people, it mattered before the hearing happens. It mattered from the day you flagged me down at that bridge." She looked at him across the table in the lamplight. "Don't make it about me," she said. "Not yet. Not until the hearing's done." "All right," he said. "After the hearing." She blew out the lamp. They walked out into the night, not together, not apart, into the summer dark of a town that was going to wake up tomorrow and find out what it was made of. She was going to find out the same thing. She thought one more morning. Just hold until morning. She held. The morning of the hearing arrived, the way important mornings always do. Ordinary on its surface, charged underneath the whole world, looking exactly as it always had, while everything prepared to change. Clara was dressed and at the Mercantile by 6. She did not eat. She drank 2 cups of coffee, and she went through the documents one final time, not because she needed to, but because the ritual of it settled her, the way physical work settled Jude. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. She had done everything that could be done in the order it needed to be done, and what happened at 10 o'clock this morning would happen on the strength of what was true. She had learned the hard way that truth is not always enough. But she had also learned that truth, properly documented and properly presented, is considerably harder to dismiss than truth standing alone. She had the documentation. She had Ansel. She had the statute. She was ready. Horace arrived at 7:30 and didn't say a word. He made coffee he already knew she'd had. He put a biscuit on the counter next to her documents and went to the back room without commentary. She ate it without tasting it. At 8, Jude came in. He was dressed cleanly, not formally, because formal was not in his vocabulary, but with the deliberate neatness of a man who has made himself presentable for something that matters. He set his hat on the counter. He looked at her. "Ansel's ready," he said. "He's been up since 5. "So have I," she said. He looked at her face, reading it the way he read terrain for what it actually said, not what he expected. "You're not afraid," he said, not a question. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm doing it anyway. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Something moved in his expression, quiet and certain. "No," he said. "They aren't." They walked to the courthouse together at 9:45. The courtroom was not large. It had 12 wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge's bench, and 2 tables facing it. The room filled faster than Clara had expected. The 3 remaining North Valley ranchers were there. Ed Marsh, Frank Dutton, Pete Garner, who still smelled faintly of smoke from his burned barn. Tom Aldridge sat beside them, square-shouldered and silent. Ruth had come, which Clara had not expected, and sat in the back row with the composed stillness of someone who has decided this is where she needs to be. Horace was beside her. On the other side of the room, Wade Prescott sat with two men, Clara recognized as his ranch managers, and a third man. She didn't, well-dressed, carrying a document case, clearly a lawyer brought in from outside Harrow Creek. So, Prescott had come with representation. She had expected that. She had Ansel. Judge Hargrove entered at 5 minutes to 10 and took his seat with the economical movements of a man who has been doing this long enough that ceremony has become function. He was younger than Clara had imagined, mid-50s, lean, with the careful eyes Ansel had described. He looked at the room. He looked at the two tables. He looked at the documents before him. "This is a hearing on procedural challenge to water rights reassignment," he said. "Filed under Territorial Statute Section 14 subsection 3 regarding public notice requirements. The challenging parties are represented by counsel and by the filing ranchers themselves." He looked at Prescott's table. The respondent, Prescott's lawyer, stood. "Marcus Holt, representing Harrow Valley Holdings, Your Honor." Hargrove looked at him with the same expression he'd used for everything else. "Mr. Holt, are you prepared to establish the procedural validity of the water rights reassignment in question?" "We are, Your Honor," Holt said. "And we intend to demonstrate that the challenge itself was improperly filed and should be dismissed on standing grounds." Clara felt Jude go still beside her. She touched his forearm once, barely, a pressure just enough to communicate steady. Hargrove looked at Ansel. "Counsel for the challenging parties." Ansel rose. "Frederick Ansel, Your Honor. We are prepared to demonstrate that the water rights reassignment of March 1882 failed to meet the public notice requirement mandated by territorial statute and is therefore procedurally invalid on its face. We are additionally prepared to present testimony and documentation establishing a pattern of coordinated land fraud connected to this reassignment spanning 12 years and multiple county jurisdictions." The room shifted, not loudly, but Clara heard it, the collective intake, the rustle of people adjusting in their seats, the quality of attention changing from curious to riveted. Hargrove looked at Ansel for a long moment. "That is a broader claim than the procedural challenge." "It is, Your Honor," Ansel said. "The procedural challenge is the primary legal question before this court today. The pattern documentation is supplemental context that this court may find relevant to the question of remedy should the challenge be upheld." Hargrove considered. "I'll allow it. Proceed." Holt went first. He was smooth and methodical, and Clara listened to every word with the specific attention of someone cataloging arguments in order to address them. His primary argument was that the challenging parties lacked standing, that the water rights reassignment had been made to a private entity whose operations did not fall under the community easement statute. He was good. She gave him that. He was good. Ansel was better. When Ansel rose, he did not hurry. He laid the foundation first, the statute, the requirement, the record of the Territorial Register showing no published notice. He called Horace to testify that the Harrow Creek Register had published no such notice and that he had the complete archives to confirm it. Horace testified with the precise, unhurried clarity of someone who has been keeping records longer than most people in this room have been alive. Holt objected twice. Hargrove sustained once, overruled once. Then Ansel introduced the pattern documentation. He built it the way Clara had built it, chronologically, document by document, name by name. The first fraudulent boundary survey. Tom Aldridge's grazing lease. The Callahan boundary dispute. The water diversion mechanism. The 5 land sales. Briggs's signature across multiple authorizations spanning 12 years. Tom testified. His voice didn't shake once. Jude testified. He described the diversion gate on the east tributary, the dimensions, the materials, the hardware. Tom had identified as manufactured in the county seat, traceable by supplier records. And then Ansel introduced the last piece. Clara had not known he was going to do this. He had kept it from the night before, not deceptively, she understood now, but because he'd wanted to present it fresh, without the weight of her anticipating it, altering how it landed in the room. He introduced a letter. Not from the case files. from his own records written by him 7 years ago addressed to the Territorial Land Commissioner's Office. It described a pattern of coordinated county-level fraud in 3 Montana territories, named a family with connections to a southern Montana land operation, and formally recommended federal investigation. The letter had been received, acknowledged, archived, and never acted upon. Holt was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This document is beyond the scope." "Overruled," Hargrove said. His voice had changed quality. Clara heard it. Everyone heard it. "Continue, Mr. Ansel." Ansel continued. When he sat down, the room was so quiet that Clara could hear the summer heat pressing against the courthouse windows. Hargrove called a 30-minute recess. Clara stood outside the courthouse in the full July sun and did not speak to anyone for the first 5 minutes. She stood with her face turned slightly away from the crowd, filtering out of the doors behind her, and she breathed, and she let herself feel the full weight of what was happening in that room. Not as strategy, not as documentation, but as the actual human reality of it. Pete Garner's burned hay. Bob Henderson signing papers on land his father built. Tom Aldridge losing a grazing lease to a forged boundary line. Jude at 17 watching his father broken by a man who understood that paperwork is a weapon when you're the only one in the room who knows how to use it. She felt it all. She let it settle. Then she turned around. Jude was standing 3 feet behind her. He had been there the whole 5 minutes, she realized, close enough to be present, far enough to give her the silence. "He's going to uphold the challenge," he said quietly. "Maybe," she said. "Don't assume." "I've been watching judges for 11 years, he said. "He's already decided. The recess is for the written order." She looked at him. "And if you're wrong," she said. "Then we go to the territorial level," he said. "Tom's in the capital. The letter to the governor went out. Cole is somewhere on the road." He met her eyes steadily. "We don't stop." "No," she agreed. "We don't." He stepped forward, not close enough to be anything declarative, just closer than before. "Clara," he said, "I told you I'd ask again when it was over." "It's not over yet," she said. "It's close enough," he said. She looked at him. At the mountain rancher, who had come down off his ridge on a black stallion in the early dark and almost ridden off a broken bridge, and who had pulled up when a woman stood in his road and told him to stop, and who had incrementally, document by document, decision by decision, placed his faith in someone he had no reason yet to trust, and turned out to have chosen correctly. "Ask me," she said. "Stay," he said. It was the simplest possible version of what he meant, and they both knew it was the simplest version of something considerably larger. Not for the accounts, not for Horace. Stay because this is the first place in a long time that's asked something of you that was worth giving. She was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me to stay in a town that spent 3 weeks looking through me," she said. "That town," he said with a directness that was almost blunt, "is standing on the other side of those courthouse doors, waiting to see what happens. And after today, the way they look at you is going to change." "People's opinions change," she said. "And change again." "Mine doesn't," he said. "Once I see a thing clearly, it stays seen." She held his gaze. Before she could answer, the courthouse door opened behind them. A clerk stepped out. "Judge is ready," he said. Hargrove delivered the ruling in 11 minutes. The water rights reassignment of March 1882 was procedurally invalid. The public notice requirement had not been met. The community easement was restored effective immediately. Harrow Valley Holdings was ordered to present its full documentation to the court within 30 days for review of the underlying transactions. Briggs was named in the order as a subject of further inquiry. The Callahan property, the Marsh property, the Dutton property, the Garner property, the Halston property, all restored to their original water access under the community easement. The Henderson sale. Bob Henderson's land, already transferred, was flagged for review on the grounds of transactions connected to fraudulent water access restrictions. It was not undone in that room, but it was opened. Holt was on his feet with objections before Hargrove finished speaking. Hargrove acknowledged each one and overruled every single one with the measured patience of a man who has made a decision and does not require further persuasion. When it was done, the room erupted, not in celebration, not immediately. In the complicated, relieved, disbelieving way that real outcomes erupt with people turning to each other and saying things quietly, with a rancher putting his face in his hands and another gripping the bench in front of him, and a third letting out a long, slow breath that seemed to carry 3 years of held tension with it. Tom Aldridge reached across and put his hand on Pete Garner's shoulder. Garner nodded once, jaw working. Ed Marsh said something Clara couldn't hear. Prescott left without a word. His lawyer followed, carrying the document case and wearing the expression of someone calculating next steps. They walked through the room and out the door, and the crowd parted for them in the instinctive way of people who have just realized which direction the wind is blowing. Clara stood at the table and did not move for a moment. She felt Jude's hand on her arm, not gripping, just present. A contact that said, "I see this. I see you. You did this." "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't make me cry in a courthouse," she said. He almost laughed. The full version. She heard it in his chest, brief and genuine. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The news about Cole arrived 2 hours later. He had reached Harrow Creek while the hearing was in session and gone directly to the courthouse, arriving in time to hear the last 15 minutes of Hargrove's ruling. He introduced himself to Clara outside the building with the directness of a man who respects the work before he respects the person who did it. "Agent Daniel Cole," he said. "Territorial Federal Land Office, Missoula." He looked at her. "Your letter was the most complete, unsolicited case documentation I've received in 12 years. Was it enough?" she said. "For the investigation, I'm opening more than enough." He looked at his notes. Briggs is the immediate priority. If he certified fraudulent surveys and water rights authorizations for compensation, that's a federal matter. Harrow Valley Holdings is the second tier. We'll follow the incorporation documents and find who's behind the company name. "Wade Prescott," she said. "Probably," he said. "But I need documents, not probability." "I have documents," she said. She reached into her satchel. He took them. He looked through the top 3 and nodded slowly. "I'll need you as a witness," he said, "when this goes to federal proceedings." "I'll be here," she said. Cole looked at her steadily. "Miss Sutton, in my experience, people who build cases like this either have a law background or they've been through something." "Both," she said. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Don't be," she said. "It made me useful." The news about Tom arrived by telegraph that evening. He had reached the territorial capital. He had delivered both letters. The land commissioner, Arthur Vance, had read the documentation and formally opened a territorial review of all county land transactions in the Harrow Creek jurisdiction involving Harrow Valley Holdings or Ridgecrest Water Management going back 10 years. He had also separately referred the matter of the unanswered 1875 letter. Ansell's letter, the one that had been received and archived and never acted upon, to the governor's office for review of administrative procedure. Someone somewhere in the territorial government was going to have to answer for that silence. Clara read the telegraph twice. Then she folded it and put it in her satchel with everything else. She was at Ruth's kitchen table when she did this. Ruth put a cup of tea in front of her without asking and sat down across from her, and they were quiet together for a long moment. "It's not over," Clara said. "No," Ruth agreed. "The Henderson land. Bob Henderson sold under duress. That process could take months. The federal proceedings against Briggs will take time. Prescott will fight every step." "Yes," Ruth said. "And there's no guarantee of everything." "There never is," Ruth said. She looked at Clara over her cup. "But there's a guaranteed thing now that wasn't there 3 weeks ago. And that's the truth being in the record. Once it's in the record, it can't be made to not exist." Clara looked at her. "Your father used to say something like that, didn't he?" Ruth said. Clara was quiet. "He said write it down. Whatever happens, write it down. Because paper outlasts everything." Ruth nodded. "Paper outlasts everything." The knock at Ruth's door came at 7 in the evening. It was Jude. Ruth answered the door, looked at him, looked back at Clara, and found a reason to be in the other room that was not remotely convincing, but that both of them allowed her. He came in and stood in the kitchen doorway, and he was not wearing his hat, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. "I heard from Cole," he said. "He's opening the investigation." "I know," she said. "He told me this afternoon. And Tom's message from the Capitol." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with the direct, unguarded attention he'd been moving toward since the beginning, and had now arrived at fully. "You answered my question at the courthouse," he said, "before the clerk called us back." "I didn't answer it," she said. "We were interrupted." "You were about to," he said, "and I'd like the answer now." She looked at him across Ruth's kitchen. The mountain rancher who had not thanked her when she saved his life at the bridge, and who had spent 3 weeks being disassembled and reconstructed by the experience of watching her work, and who had asked her to stay in the simplest possible words, because he was a man who said what he meant and nothing extra. She thought about her father's hardware store, about the 2 years in Omaha, about every town she'd moved through, every temporary position, every room she'd slept in, knowing it was borrowed. About arriving in Harrow Creek with $11 and a letter, and the habit deeply ingrained, now nearly reflexive, of holding herself at a careful distance from anything she might be asked to leave. She thought about what it would mean to stay, to wake up in one place and have that place wake up around her. To be known somewhere not as the new bookkeeper, not as the woman who flagged down the rider at the bridge, but as someone who belonged to a particular piece of ground and had it belong back. She thought, "I don't know if I know how to do that." And then she thought, that's the point of learning. "You said your ranch has 800 acres, she said. He looked at her carefully, following the pivot. "About that," he said. "And you've been running it alone for 11 years. "Yes." "And the accounts," she said. "They're a mess." He almost smiled. "They're not a mess. They're just not organized." "That's what a mess is," she said. "Mr. Callahan." He waited. "I'll stay," she said. "Through the federal proceedings at minimum. I'm a witness. I'm needed." "That's not why I'm asking," he said. "I know," she said. "But it's where I start. I start with the practical reason, and I figure out the rest from there. That's how I do things." He looked at her for a long moment. "How long does a federal proceeding take?" he said. "Could be a year," she said. "Could be 2. "And after that," he said. She met his eyes steadily. "Ask me in a year," she said, "and bring a better argument." He did laugh then. Genuine, full, the kind that changes the quality of a room. She hadn't heard that sound from him before. She liked it considerably more than she expected to. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The months that followed moved the way important months do fast in retrospect, heavy in the living of them. Briggs was removed from his position by order of the Territorial Commissioner within 6 weeks of Cole's investigation opening. The fraudulent survey certifications were formally invalidated. 2 of the 5 North Valley land sales were reversed through legal action. The documentation was clear enough, the fraud established enough, that even the buyers who'd purchased in good faith were compensated from holdings as escrow under court order. Bob Henderson got his land back. It took 4 months and 2 separate hearings and a ruling from the territorial court that Clara sat through from a bench in the back row. And when the final order was read, she heard Bob Henderson make a sound she would never describe to anyone because it was too private to belong to a story. Wade Prescott did not go quietly. He challenged every step through every mechanism available. His lawyer Holt was skilled and patient and well compensated. But the documentation was complete. The pattern was undeniable, and federal authority does not bend to county influence the way county courts occasionally do. Cole built the federal case with the same methodical precision that Clara had used to build the foundation for it. He credited her in his formal report, not effusively, but clearly, with the specific language of someone acknowledging the person who made the work possible. She read the report once, then she filed it. She was still at the Mercantile. Horace had formalized her position, not assistant, but partner with a share of the accounts and the authority to manage the financial records as she saw fit. She had rearranged the filing system in the first month, and it had taken him approximately 2 days to admit that her system was better, which had pleased her more than she expected. Ruth stayed her friend. Tom Aldridge stayed her ally. Vera Halston, who had not become warm exactly, but who had become honest in the particular way of a woman who has been wrong about something and won't be wrong about it again, greeted her by name every time they crossed paths. Jude came down from the mountain twice a week, sometimes for supply orders, sometimes without an obvious reason which he never invented an excuse for, and which she stopped requiring an explanation of somewhere around the 3rd month. He did not repeat the question. He had said he would ask in a year, and he was a man who meant what he said. She was aware of the year passing, the way she was aware of seasons changing, a background thing, constant, significant in accumulation, rather than in any single moment. The bridge was repaired in September, fully both sides, new timber, proper foundation. The town council authorized the work after Clara submitted a formal structural assessment that Horace presented on her behalf, which he did with the particular satisfaction of a man who has found the correct person for a thing and intends to use her for it. She wrote the assessment herself. She cited the statute. She included a timeline. Nothing failed. The year came around on a Thursday. She knew it was the anniversary because she had been keeping track, not obsessively, but honestly, the way she kept track of things that mattered. 12 months since she'd arrived on the stage from Billings with $11 and a worn dress and a habit of watching for rot in the things people assumed were solid. Jude came into the mercantile that morning at the usual time. He picked up the supply order Horace had ready. He set it on the counter. Then he looked at Clara. "It's been a year," he said. "It has," she said. "I said I'd bring a better argument," he said. She set down her pen. She gave him her full attention, which she had learned he responded to, the way most people respond to kindness, with a directness that was its own form of it. He did not have a speech prepared. She could see that, and she was glad of it, because a speech would have been wrong. "I watched you save my life before I knew your name," he said. "I watched you build a case that gave 5 families their futures back. I watched you sit in a courtroom and not flinch when the most powerful man in this county tried to use the weight of his name to push you aside." He paused. "And I watched you eat Horace's biscuits when you were running on 3 hours of sleep, because you didn't want to be a burden on anyone, even when you were the only person holding the whole thing together." She was very still. "I'm not asking you to stay because I need the accounts managed," he said. "I'm not asking because the ranch has more work than 2 hands can cover. And you're the most competent person I've ever met, though. Both of those things are true." He looked at her directly. "I'm asking because I have spent 11 years being certain that trusting someone past a certain point was a calculation I couldn't afford. And I was wrong. And I don't want to spend the next 11 years being wrong in the same way." The mercantile was quiet. Horace was in the back room making himself very busy with something that required a great deal of attention. Ruth had been in 15 minutes earlier, and then remembered an errand with suspicious convenience. Clara looked at Jude Callahan, the mountain cowboy who hadn't thanked her at the bridge and had been making up for it ever since, in the way of a man who doesn't apologize in words, but in the slow, consistent accumulation of showing up. "You said you see a thing clearly, and it stays seen," she said. "Yes," he said. "What do you see?" she said. "A woman," he said, "who has been carrying things alone for so long that she's forgotten what it feels like to set something down and know it'll still be there when she comes back." He met her eyes. "I want to be the place she sets things down." She breathed. The thing she'd been holding at a distance, the future tense of herself, the version that stayed somewhere that belonged to something moved closer than it had ever been. She felt the familiar reflex calculate the risk, assess the structure, check for rot before you put your weight on it. She had checked this structure for a year. She had tested every load-bearing point. She knew what it was made of. "The accounts," she said, "are going to require a complete overhaul." He almost smiled. "I know. And the east fence line needs new posts before winter. I've seen it from the road." "I know that too," he said. "And I am not," she said with complete seriousness, a woman who changes her name without a conversation. "I'll have that conversation," he said. "Anytime you want." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. He went still. "Yes," she said again, clearer, without qualification. The way she wrote the things that mattered directly with nothing left ambiguous. He crossed the distance between them without hurrying, which was exactly right, and he took her hand in both of his, the way a man holds something he has learned the value of, and he said nothing for a moment, because nothing needed saying. The mercantile bell rang as someone came through the front door. They stepped apart, not guiltily, just practically, because they were both practical people, and Clara picked up her pen, and Jude picked up his hat, and the ordinary business of an ordinary Thursday morning in Harrow Creek resumed around them. But it was not an ordinary morning. She knew it. He knew it. The summer outside was already at full heat, the kind that had brought her to this town a year ago. Relentless, demanding, uninterested in what anyone thought about it. The same creek ran east of town under the repaired bridge, carrying water in the direction the land required it to go. The North Valley ranches were working again, running cattle on restored water access, building back what had been systematically drained from them. The bridge held. The water ran true. And Clara Sutton, who had arrived in Harrow Creek with $11 and the careful, practiced stillness of a woman who had stopped expecting to be chosen, found herself chosen. Not because she had proven her value under pressure, not because she had made herself useful enough to be kept, not because she had outworked or outweighted or outlasted her way into being noticed, but because a man had watched her stand in the middle of a dark road and stop something dangerous, and had looked at her, really looked, and had not looked away. She had been worth seeing all along. She had known it. It took Harrow Creek a year to catch up. It was enough. It was more than enough. She picked up her pen and she returned to the work that was hers, in the town that was becoming hers, in the life that she was, for the first time in a very long time, choosing back.